The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy.
Hello and welcome to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. My name is Josh Edison. I am sitting in Auckland, New Zealand. Actually I was going to say not sitting, but you are probably sitting, aren't you?
I am sitting somewhere in the world. I am the Carmen Sandiego of sitting.
Sitting, but not in Auckland, New Zealand, is the crucial point, is Dr. M.R.X. Dentith. Where are you today?
Well, actually, to find me, you will in fact have to travel to one of 4 countries and then see whether you can find one of my many minions there that will give you a hint to the fact that I am in Karlsruhe in Germany.
Right.
Oh God, I've given it away.
Ah, you have. You should have been wearing your big red wide-brimmed hat, and then we never would have
I couldn't fit it in my suitcase. Those hats are a pain to take around the world. Carmen Sandiego really should be congratulated for her ability to travel with a large hat at all times.
Yes, I admire it. But yes, no, for the second week in a row, you're in Karlsruhe, Germany. Coincidence?
I think so.
And today you're going to move aside the curtain, but not in a dirty way, and let us into the goings on and the ins and outs, again not in a dirty way, of what you've been up to there, I understand.
And reveal that there was never a curtain in the first place. I've got electronic blinds.
Ah, well there you go. The curtain was all in our minds. I suppose we could crack straight ahead to the news. Do you have anything else before we do that?
No, not at all.
No. Well,
I mean, I could just shout out the word penis,
yeah,
but I'm not going to.
I was going to say it's been done, but it has literally been done on this podcast more than once, as I recall. So yeah,
yes, in fact, actually, in our early days, there was an awful lot of ejaculation going on of the word penis.
Yeah, great many penis ejaculations, and I mean that in the classical sense, obviously.
And of course, now I'm thinking about that segment from QI about how often Watson ejaculates in the Sherlock Holmes stories, including ejaculating out of windows.
He does.
And I'm going to have to cut. I don't know whether I should actually cut this out because I'm bursting into laughter, or whether I should keep it in because I just find the notion that the word ejaculate has changed meaning so entirely in the space of 100 years to be really quite fantastic.
It's one of the more metaphorical meaning, or rather less metaphorical meanings, acquired prominence. It's a fairly common-ish thing in linguistics that if a word acquires a meaning that's a little bit rude or taboo or something, then that tends to overshadow all its previous ones. Gay being the obvious example, but prophylactic was a generic term for any sort of a preventative until people started using it to refer to condoms, and now that's all it means. Ejaculate's another one. Language, it's fascinating. Be fascinated, damn you.
No, it's not.
Oh, okay. Well, let's do the
language is very boring. Very, very boring. Let's go straight to the news.
Yep, okay.
Breaking conspiracy theories in the news.
We start the news from the mother country. Dear old Blighty, what have our masters and mistresses in Westminster been up to, old chap, old fellow, I'll tell you how.
Conspiring with the Russians.
Not again. Am I doing the accent the whole time? Do I have
You can give up if you like.
Is nowhere safe from claims of conspiring or colluding with the Russians these days?
No, not even your mother. Anyway, the rolling fiasco, which is Brexit, continues to cause trouble for everyone. This time, Aaron Banks, who helped fund Leave.eu, one of the many pro-Brexit campaigns prior to that particular referendum. Banks, who met with Russia's UK ambassador 3 times in 2015 and 2016, discussing Brexit and Donald Trump's election campaign, has admitted the Leave campaign used fake news because they were running a campaign deliberately aimed at making fun of people. Banks is now claiming that talk of his meetings with the Russian ambassador, 2 meetings of which he never admitted to prior, are simply Remainers ramoning about losing that Brexit referendum.
This is the same Aaron Banks whose Brexit campaign failed to report nearly £100,000 they spent on the Leave campaign?
Yes.
The same Aaron Banks whose campaign was fined by the Electoral Commission for breaches of electoral law over the Leave campaign they ran?
Yes.
Sounds like a top bloke. We should not besmirch his character any further. Meanwhile, we should get to the bottom of the deep state plot to stop Russians from being able to protest and rally in the streets of Washington, D.C.
Ooh, sounds juicy. Do tell.
USA Really is an offshoot of Russia's federal news agency, and they wanted to run a rally celebrating Donald J. Trump's birthday.
He's one of those US President Malarkey fellows, isn't he?
Allegedly. Anyway, they applied for a permit to hold their rally, but the permit they applied for was a film permit, which was rejected as the authorities looked into their application and told them that they should have applied for a permit for a rally rather than for the filming of an event. So USA Really is now claiming this is part of a deep state plot to stop Russian media interests from rallying in support of a US president.
Scandalous. A conspiracy by the deep state to stop Russian interference in US politics. What does the world come to?
Indeed. Add to this a recent and unsubstantiated rumour that Donald Trump likes to tear up all his paperwork, and things in the US are looking decidedly weird at the moment.
Actually, on that paperwork issue, there's something quite nice and illustrative about conspiracy theories right there. You see, even if we end up being agnostic about that particular assertion being true, it's one of those things which feeds into conspiracy theories about Trump generally. The Obama administration was known for its very careful handling of paperwork which crossed the president's desk or was touched by him, given there is a requirement such paperwork is archived. However, the Trump administration is not known for its careful procedures, so it seems plausible to people that Trump would be the kind of person who would screw or tear up paperwork when he's done with it.
Which I guess supports either the notion the administration is either incompetent when it comes to data retention or conspiring to keep the information the president knows about secret.
Precisely. The fact the story ends with the sources claiming that they were then paid to piece together torn-up documents with sticky tape just makes it all the better, since it suggests there are forces in the White House fighting back against Trump and what he stands for.
Conspiracies upon conspiracies. What will they think of next?
And now, grunge news. Josh, you're the only person in this duo who A, owns a flannel shirt, and B, thinks music in the 90s was any good. So you can take the lead on this one.
Thank you, Ian. Now, I think Em thinks I don't read these scripts in advance. I do read them. I'm just too lazy to alter them. So bearing that in mind... I say this of my own free will and not because I've been scripted to, but the 90s were pure horseshit and nothing about them and nothing was any good. Indeed, I will go burn my flannel shirt as soon as this recording is finished, but before then, some news about Kurt Cobain's guitar and Courtney Love.
That was very, very sincere sounding. Although I should point out that Hole was pretty good. Damn good, actually.
Nothing about the 90s was good, nothing. So the daughter of Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love, Frances Bean Cobain, had an ex-husband, Isaiah Silver, who has filed a lawsuit against Courtney Love. He alleges there was a conspiracy to assault, kidnap and murder him, and it's all over contested ownership of a 1959 D18E Martin guitar Kurt Cobain played at Nirvana's 1993 MTV Unplugged appearance.
Juicy. So, what about this murder-kidnap plot?
Well, just after midnight on June the 3rd, 2016, Silver alleges that 3 men broke into the house he had shared with his estranged wife in what was an attempt to take the guitar. The men allegedly beat and groped Silver, stole his phone, and then dragged him to a waiting car and drove away. However, Silver wasn't alone, and a friend not only called 911 but blocked the street with his own car. Now, no arrests were made because Silver was warned that Love, his estranged wife, and the 3 men controlled the judicial system, the LAPD, and the media. So Silver told the police the whole thing was a prank which had gone wrong.
Okay, that sounds weird.
It gets more interesting. Silver thinks that Sorry, Silver thinks that had his friend not intervened, that he would have been taken somewhere and murdered. Not just that, but the men and Courtney Love went to great lengths to create the impression that he was depressed, drug addicted, and on the brink of committing suicide, and that he'd recently inquired about where to obtain a firearm. Silver's claims someone hacked his iPhone's message app in order to text falsified suicidal remarks to a friend, an episode he found so unsettling he reported it to police.
Well, this gets grander and grander. And this is all about a guitar.
Yes, basically Silver claims Frances gifted him the guitar. Courtney says this isn't true and the guitar was never her daughter's to gift anyway. However, he's recently managed to secure ownership of the guitar through the courts, and this new lawsuit seems to be related to that struggle.
Any references to the death of Kurt Cobain?
But of course, Silver claims Kurt's mum, Wendy, told him that she thought Courtney was involved in the suicide of her son.
Well, that's quite the story. More proof, I think, that the 90s are still causing harm to all and sundry.
Let that decade burn in hell.
Now, I would like to point out to listeners who don't watch the video version of this podcast, in the video version of this podcast, you will see myself cracking up at particular points where I force Josh to say things against his will. But of course, in the podcast version, I can quite easily remove my laughter from that and make it sound as if everything was very serious indeed. And finally, Star Wars.
Ah, Star Wars. So, do we have a juicy conspiracy theory about Supreme Leader Snoke or some such?
Not that Star Wars, Reagan-era Star Wars.
Ah.
Precisely. Now, back in 1983, Air Force officer Captain William Howard Hughes Jr. disappeared, apparently just before or whilst en route to the Netherlands for work purposes. His family felt his disappearance was mysterious, and authorities thought at the time he might have defected to the Soviet Union. But it seems he just went to California and started a new life under an assumed name.
Why?
The 80s, Joshua, the 80s. As frightening a place to be alive as the 90s, worse even, atomic war was always just around the corner. No, Hughes Jr. became Barry O'Byrne, and he lived in California for 35 years before finally being found out over inconsistencies with his passport.
And this is conspiracy news how, exactly?
Well, the thing was, because people assumed Hughes had defected or been kidnapped, there were different. There was a disaster in the 80s and early 90s. He knew things about the Star Wars program and the like, so shuttle disasters, the explosion of the Ariane rocket in French Guiana and the like, were all thought at one time or another to be the result of sabotage, with Hughes a possible source.
But instead, he was just living in California.
Allegedly. There is still some investigation going on about his story, but it seems he may well have just got fed up with being a G-man and gone to ground.
Just like your mum.
Hey, we don't talk about my mother's work for the Secret Service. Cut the feed!
Righto, well, this just in. And by this, I mean M. And by in, I mean in Karlsruhe. And by just, I mean for about a week or more. But you get the point. Stuff's happening. It's all happening. It's all go in Karlsruhe, Germany. All go regarding fake news, I understand. So this week we're going to be talking about a forthcoming paper, an early draft of which I have been privileged to read, by the name of What is Fake About Fake News, by one MRX Dentith Fellow, New Europe College. I guess before we get into the paper, can you tell us a bit about the New Europe College and the hijinks you've been up to with them?
Well, it's in Europe, it's a college, and it's new. What more do you need to know? So the New Europe College is an advanced research institute in Bucharest in Romania. It was set up just over 20 years ago now. It essentially was a kind of offshoot from the University of Bucharest. So long story short, 20 years ago, certain members of the University of Bucharest thought that the university wasn't producing adequate research, and so they sought external funding to start their own private research institute, which has maintained itself. I should point out that no matter what the founders of New Europe College thought at the time, the University of Bucharest now is a first-class world standard university. It has a very good placement record of its PhD students into good positions elsewhere around the world. So you wouldn't need to start the New Europe College now, but that's where I'm resident. It's an advanced research institute, and I am one of its fellows. And that's fellows with a capital F, because that is a title.
It is, and it is in your capacity as a fellow of the New Europe College that you're in Karlsruhe at the moment, is it?
Basically, yes, I'm a visiting fellow here. So there are all sorts of you could describe me as a non-stipendiary visiting fellow at the debate lab at KIT. So I'm here for 2 weeks talking with the people here about conspiracy theories, secrecy, and fake news. And because I was meant to be presenting a paper on fake news at a conference in Bucharest whilst I was away in logistics of going to Germany, going back to Romania to give a 1-hour talk, and then coming back to Germany, really didn't work out. I'm presenting the paper as a written submission to their proceedings, and that's what I'm working on whilst I'm here in Germania.
Fabulous. So, what is fake about fake news? No surprises for guessing why a person would be talking about fake news in this day and age. But maybe this is an obvious question, but what exactly is the problem with fake news then that you're investigating?
So, the problem with fake news appears to be its centrality to certain kinds of contemporary political discourse. So fake news has been with us probably for as long as there's been news. There's always been a situation where people have presented stories as news stories, and they've been presented in such a way to deliberately mislead some target audience. And we find examples of fake news going throughout the entire newspaper era in Western history. So at the beginning of the 20th century, end of the 19th century, there were lots of tabloids in the UK. Those tabloids produced sensationalized stories, so partially fictionalized accounts of things, and sometimes entirely fabricated stories in their pages. So fake news is not a new problem. What it is a new label for an existing issue, an issue to do with how we judge the reliability of sources, how we judge the trustworthiness of sources, and also the really awkward question when it comes to a kind of epistemological framework: how do we make claims about the intentions of the people behind these stories? What's new about the problem, as I said, is probably it's become weaponized in the last few years, largely because of one man, US President Donald J. Trump, who likes to go around talking about fake news and the fake media, which has taken a term which has been around for a while and made it into something really quite big and stupendous.
Yes, I mean, fake news as a phrase certainly came to prominence during the last presidential election. And we must remember that Donald Trump did not invent the term. In fact, as I recall, in the context of the campaign, it was Democrats talking about the things that Trump had been saying. They started calling that fake news, but then the Trump campaign turned their own weapon against them. He took the term, you might say he put his thing down, flipped it, and reversed it, if Donald Trump is worthy of mentioning in the same breath as Missy Elliott. But since then has kind of taken ownership of the term. And in fact, didn't he try to sort of suggest he was going to copyright the term fake news at one point or something? I'm sure that...
I do remember something along those lines of trying to make the claim that he at least invented the term, which, as people pointed out, no, there's prior art by the Democrats. But also the Democrats themselves got it from left-wing media analysis from the 80s and 90s. So you find the term fake news appearing in academic works, and it's very much a left-wing attack on right-wing news. What's interesting about what Trump has done is that's almost entirely reversed now.
So it's not a new problem, but it's perhaps a newly pressing problem. I guess as good philosophers we should start with definition then. What exactly counts as fake news, and is it is it separate from disinformation? Is one a species of the other?
Yes. Let's start with the definitional issue. So fake news is going to be any story presented as news which targets an audience and is by design meant to deceive. So basically any time where you modify a story in such a way to make it warrant some particular viewpoint. So I was having this discussion with a colleague the other day. Can fake news be entirely true? And I think it can be if you are leaving out salient points which might act as mitigating factors.
Ooh,
so you might...
Sorry,
Yes?
I'm just going to look something up now that I've thought of it just based on what you said.
Which is entirely true, but actually misses out on salient details which explain certain features. Now, so I was just having a discussion with Gregor Betts at KIT here, and he was talking about the way that the inauguration crowds were reported at Trump's inauguration. And it is true the crowds were smaller than that of Obama's first and second inauguration. But if you leave out salient details about the weather forecast of that day, then that goes some way to make the story seem more fake than it is. So if you are aware ahead of time that there were heavy showers forecast for that day, that then suddenly explains why people were less likely to be at that inauguration. Well, the weather forecast for Obama's first and second inaugurations were for good weather, which thus encouraged people to go out there. But the kind of fake news we tend to be concerned about are cases where the story contains fabrications or is entirely fictitious. So that's the fake news stuff. But of course, what's also interesting, because it's kind of a first order issue, is the second order issue, which are, of course, allegations of fake news. Because alleging something is fake news doesn't tell you it is fake news. And indeed, one way to get people to not believe the news is to label that news as being fake. So there are two phenomena that need to be kind of disambiguated here. Now, have you found the thing that you were looking for, or should I move on to the disinformation point? Because I just feel like I'm vamping at this point.
No, I have found it. You talk of the potential of something being fake news and yet containing nothing but the truth. Reminded me of the case of the slandering of Claude Pepper. Now, I don't know if the story is actually true or not, but it's a story that's been around for a long time. It was a 1950 congressional election. One George Smathers was going up against Congressman Claude Pepper and supposedly gave a speech, the implication being that he was sort of talking to a bunch of ignorant country bumpkins, but he gave a speech where he alleged that Pepper's brother was a known Homo sapien, that his sister was a practicing thespian. He accused Pepper of matriculating into college and claimed that he practiced celibacy before marriage. Again, that sounds a little bit too good to be true, but it immediately popped to my mind as a case of a person saying things that were entirely true, but meaning them to have a negative effect on its audience. History, eh?
Ooh, I like that example. Please send me through your source there, because I'd like to use that, because yes, I mean, what a terrible thing to matriculate into college. I mean, actually, that sounds quite sinister.
Yeah, I just the first page I came to had a few questions of whether or not it's true, and no one seems quite certain about it, and pointed to other examples such as a fictitious speech from Mad Magazine where someone talks about someone subscribing to a phonographic magazine and practicing nepotism with his sister-in-law. But yeah, anyway, it's an interesting idea. But carrying on from definitions, though, so I mean, this here is a podcast about conspiracy theories. You yourself are an academic specializing in conspiracy theories, and here we are talking about fake news. Does fake news necessarily, or at least in general, imply some sort of a conspiracy?
Fake news itself, not necessarily. The allegation of people producing fake news often does imply a conspiracy. So think of Donald J. Trump talking about fake media, fake news outlets, and fake news. He uses that as a way of describing a liberal media conspiracy against him. So the allegation of fake news often does contain within it a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, and that kind of gets to the centre of a lot of your paper, is that there are actually two problems here when we're talking about the problem of fake news. One is the actual production and dissemination of fake news deliberately or unwittingly, and especially in terms of the spreading of it. But there's also the problem of people deflecting any criticism of them, naming no names, Donald J. Trump, by claiming that any sort of criticism is merely fake news. So what do we think, basically, about the sort of dual nature of this problem?
Well, I think it's a interesting case of how labeling something can make it automatically appear to be a problem. And we find this in the literature on conspiracy theories and conspiracy theorists. If you can weaponize the term conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorist, then you can use that as a knockdown argument against anyone who questions what you might be doing. Oh, they're just putting forward a conspiracy theory. No, you shouldn't believe them. They're just a conspiracy theorist. And depending on your political inclinations, the kind of society you live in and the like, that may or may not work in some contexts. So as we saw with the dirty politics material in the election before last back home, John Key described Nikki Hager as a conspiracy theorist, putting forward a conspiracy theory, and the public's response was, well, yes, it is a conspiracy theory, but is it true? So sometimes this doesn't work. And what we're seeing with the Trump stuff with fake news is that it's very much targeted towards a particular part of Trump's base. So Trump's claiming that CNN produces fake news only works for the kind of people who don't trust CNN in the first place and think there's some kind of liberal media conspiracy to destroy Trump. It doesn't work on aficionados of CNN. They don't suddenly go, oh, my news network produces fake news, I should probably stop watching it. They end up going, no, that's just Trump doing his thing.
Right, and so I guess the question all this leads to is what can we do about this? In the draft of your paper that I read, you kind of hadn't got up to that point in the paper yet. There's just mention of polite society. So can you fill me in on your on what's percolating in your brains about what we might do about the problem of fake news?
I think part of the problem of fake news, and I was having this discussion with Gregor the other day, I think also part of my solution comes from the weird kind of media landscape we have in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So I think it's fair to say that in our home country, we really only have one newspaper of note, which is the New Zealand Herald. I mean, there is the Press, there's the Otago Daily Times. There are other smaller newspapers available, but they don't have much in the way of circulation. Most of the Herald is available everywhere. And we only have two major TV stations with competing news bulletins. So we have an almost complete lack of diversity in our media space. And that means that we have a kind of malformed media, which tends to be fairly pliant and supplicant to whatever the government says. So it's a fairly well-known feature that when National are in charge, the Herald is very pro-national and anti-Labour, and when Labour are in charge, the Herald ends up being fairly pro-Labour and not as accommodating to National, because there's a kind of institutional buy-in going on at that particular point in time. If you want to be able to report what the government is doing, then you need to be on the good side of the government. You need to make sure you've got access to ministers. You're going to be able to go to briefings and the like. You can't take a stand against any particular political position, because then the government of the day can go, well, we just won't deal with you. And because there isn't any other competing newspaper interest, that points in the other direction. Our one newspaper has to go, well, we just have to make sure we're always on the good side of whoever is in charge at any particular point in time. And that kind of creates a false sense of politeness, that whenever the government speaks, newspapers go, uh-huh, yes, uh-huh, well, thank you, Minister, for your time. Well, so it actually would be quite good to have a media landscape which actually is slightly antagonistic to claims of this particular type. So I have a feeling that my proposed solution does come ever so slightly from the weirdness of the media landscape we have in Aotearoa. But certainly it's true that certain news networks in the US absolutely lap up Donald J. Trump's claims of fake news. So if you look at Fox, and apparently Trump's favorite show, Fox and Friends, as soon as Trump makes some claim about the fake media this, the fake media that, the people or the hosts, I don't know whether the hosts on Fox and Friends are actually people or whether they're just very elaborate media robots, they end up going, oh yes, it's terrible what CNN is doing or MSNBC is doing. That's just more fake news from those liberal media outlets. And that kind of weird politeness that's going on here, which is that as soon as the boss says something, we go, uh-huh, yes, thank you for your time. Whilst if we kind of ditched that politeness and actually engaged in the robust cut and thrust of democratic debate, claims of fake news wouldn't have as much power. That's not to say there wouldn't be fake news, but alleging something as fake news and using that as a knockdown argument against someone's position wouldn't quite work. You'd go, yeah, I mean, you're saying it's fake news, but is it? Which is what we saw with the whole Nikki joke. John Key tried to use a weaponized form of the term conspiracy theory, and the New Zealand public went, but is it? Is it? Is it, Josh?
Yes. No, hang on, what was the question? Is it a conspiracy theory or is it true? Actually, yes to both. Is it no? Can I change my answer? Will this affect my final grade?
It will affect your final grade, but I gave you your final grade before the podcast even started.
Okay, well, that's all right then. That makes sense in terms of New Zealand, although the US media landscape, as it appears from here, would appear to be extremely combative, and yet fake news is kind of where it's really blossomed. That said, though, the left-wing media who get called fake news do seem to be a little more supplicant, if that's the right word, and the right side, especially the Fox News, do seem to be definitely a hell of a lot more antagonistic. So as part of the problem there isn't enough balance, that one side is more polite than the other, or what do you think is going on in that particular landscape?
So I think something really quite interesting about allegations of fake news, because of course Donald J. Trump isn't the first person to allege that certain news networks produce fake news. Alex Jones has been making claims about media producing fake news all the time. And what's interesting is that if Alex Jones claims, for example, that CNN is producing false news reports about X, Y, or Z, CNN does not feel the need to respond to Alex Jones. Alex Jones is a prominent radio online host with a tendency to engage in conspiracy theories. He's got a fairly big presence online, but he's not big enough for news networks to go, oh, we must respond to what Alex Jones is saying about us. Trump, however, being leader of possibly the world's only remaining superpower, making claims about fake news and fake media is the kind of thing that CNN needs to respond to. And the kind of response they give, as you point out, is more of supplication than it is of aggression. So whilst there's a kind of pushback against what the president says, by and large what they try to do is get on the right side of Trump. And that's the kind of weird politeness to these particular claims that we should be resisting.
I've heard it said that the US system, and indeed most of the systems in the polite Western world, lean quite heavily on the notion of shame, that if a person is caught doing something wrong, society shames them, they feel ashamed and are therefore motivated themselves to do something about it. But the whole system falls apart when you're dealing with people who have no shame and who, being confronted with having told a total lie, rather than going, "Oh God, yes, you've got me, fine, I done wrong, and I'll fall on my sword," or whatever, instead double down and just say, "Hell no, that's, who are you going to believe, me, you or your lion eyes?" There's a reference to the Shaggy song, "It Wasn't Me," in there somewhere, but I can't quite get it out of me at the moment. So it certainly seems that, they've managed to game a fairly significant societal institution by themselves not buying into what I guess you could call a form of politeness. So yes, perhaps the only alternative is to be less polite back.
And of course, this actually speaks to a big issue with fake news in general, which is making claims about the intentions of the actors behind it. So there is a question here as to when Donald J. Trump makes claims about fake media and fake news, is he sincerely trying to convince people, or is he just completely agnostic about the truth of his claims? Because if it turns out that he's just saying things for political or pragmatic reasons, and he actually has no attachment to the truth of the claims he's making, there's a question there as to whether that makes things slightly better or a whole lot worse.
Well, yes, I mean, I've heard it said that part of the strategy behind employing claims of fake news a lot is not necessarily about each individual claim. It's about the overall effect of claiming everything as fake news and that black is white and up is down. Just simply erodes the notion of truth whatsoever, so that they can get to the point where anyone can say anything and essentially get away with it, because at this point people have given up on trying to determine what's true and what isn't. Certainly when I do get the impression from Trump that he simply says whatever pops into his mind at the present moment that he thinks would be the most advantageous thing to say, even if he then goes and contradicts himself 30 seconds later. So possibly in his case there isn't such a long-term strategy going on, but it does seem to be something that's been jumped on by elements within his wider circle and perhaps around the media that enables him.
Yes, and I mean, this is one of these things where even though the phenomena we're talking about, news which is fake, and allegations of people producing news which is fake, isn't actually new, the umbrella term fake news, as it's currently being used, is. And so academics like myself are trying to work out a way to talk about the phenomena and get to the root issues, because in the end, I don't know that we'll be talking about fake news and allegations of fake news in 10 years' time. I mean, because the issue is a lot older than the umbrella term, presumably the term fake news will slip out of the political lexicon in a cycle or so, and we'll just go back to what the base issue is, which is trustworthiness, reliability, and the intention of actors. But at this particular point in time, it's a fairly interesting phenomena to try and work with. And it's a great way of showing how you can apply epistemology to contemporary public debate.
Indeed. Well, Dr. Dentith, that's about all we have time for. It just remains for me to say, yes, thank you for your time. Do you have any closing remarks?
Yes, all of what I said was fake news.
Curse you! You got us again. Righto, well, we've come to the end of another episode. The internet has been slightly ropier than usual throughout this, so the audio seemed fine, but the video...
Actually, really quite ropey in parts. Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll just have to see. I'm sure we can put something together. But otherwise, you're back in Romania from next week, are you?
I am indeed. I return back to Bucharest tomorrow night.
Indeed. Well, in that case, it'll be business as usual-ish again until you're back in New Zealand, I suppose.
That's true.
So until next week, I don't see that there's anything left to say than goodbye.
And once again, everything on this podcast was fake news.
What I really meant to say was hello.
Buenos Aires. Con Diablo. Hijo.
Goodbye.
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 You've been listening to the podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. It is written, researched, and performed by Josh Addison, aka Monkey Fluids, and MRX Dentith, aka Conspiracism on Twitter. This podcast is available where all good podcasts can be found, as well as iTunes, Podbean, and Stitcher. It can also be watched on YouTube. Just search for the podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, or, if you happen to be technophobic, consult the auguries. You can support the podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy via our Patreon page, as listed in the podcast description, or just by searching for us on Patreon. You can also support us via the Podbean patronage system, if that is more your style. You do you. If you want to get in contact with us, why not email us at podcastconspiracy@gmail.com or find us on Facebook. And remember, Soylent Green is Meeples.